Good morning, Shinko. Good to see you. We are at the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and begin. And as we do, let's begin with a couple of minutes of silence and just share being still together. If everyone could mute their microphone, that would be good too. Okay, thank you, everybody. Oh, well, let's see. Are we all muted? That's good. Thank you. Hi, John. Good to see you. So let's get started. Thank you all for joining. We have a nice group this morning. There's 21 of us so far, 22 and growing. So this is our monthly Zen Peacemakers members meeting. And I just want to say a couple of things about that. If for whatever reason you're not subscribed on the Hive as a member, I really encourage you to do so. It's our best way to stay in touch with one another and to communicate. We're trying to do some new things program-wise, so this is a good way to stay in touch. If you're inclined to donate, we are a nonprofit, and we will certainly be very grateful for that. So thank you for that. With our monthly members meetings, by the way, I'm Geoff O'Keefe. I'm the executive director. Didn't introduce myself. With our monthly members meetings, we're trying to shake things up just a little bit and bring in guests each month and try to make the content so interesting that you will set a timer or a calendar reminder to make sure that you attend. So I'll introduce Grant here in just a second, but just a quick word about what's coming up. In May, and I don't have the dates in front of me, but they're all on the website. In May, our guest will be Susan Nemchek, who is the executive director of Willow Farm Contemplative Center here in Colorado, and they do end-of-life training for people looking to move into hospice work and end-of-life care. So that'll be really an interesting program. That's in May. In June, our guests will be Manny and Renee Ironhawk from the Lakota tribe in South Dakota, who we are scheduled at this point to do a week-long plunge with in Wyoming and Montana. That's certainly at risk at this point, naturally. Nonetheless, they will be our guests in June, and I've asked them to talk to us about their personal project, the Lowy School, which many of you know about, but it's a school teaching young Lakota kids the language. There are less than a handful of 100 native Lakota speakers left in the world. And this is a real, linguistic rescue mission, if you will. And they're wonderful, wonderful friends of ours, and they will make great guests. That's in June. And then in July, our guest will be Moshe Cohen, or Mr. Yuhu. who is one of the founders of the Order of Disorder, and he has threatened to mime for 90 minutes. So I wouldn't miss that. So keep your eye on the calendar. And then we'll have more coming up August and on through the rest of the year. We're in conversation with some people, so stay tuned. I'd like to introduce Grant Couch Sensei, who is our guest today, and he will be talking about the environmental crisis, climate change, and the virus as they're coming together right in front of our eyes. So, Grant, I'll hand over to you and let you do your own personal introduction, and then get into your topic.
Okay, thank you, Geoff. One thing I just want to add for those of you who are not members to Geoff's invitation to join is that we are a nonprofit. We are very happy to accept donations, but there is no membership fee or no required minimum or anything. So it's the desire to expand the net as much as possible so that we can all stay connected and support each other both during this time and going forward. So my background, I guess, is just asked me to sort of share that a little bit. I'm based in Boulder, but currently hunkered down in Key West. I'm retired from the financial world and have been blessed to be able to spend winters down in Key West where we have a community of friends. My wife and I decided not to go back home at the end of March because it just seemed too dangerous to travel at this time, and why take the risk? And so we're actually staying at a friend's house who've left for the season and said we could use their house. So it's quite a gift that we have down here, which is great. In terms of my background, I mentioned that I was in the financial world before I retired, and afterwards, I was really called to get involved with climate. And the way that that showed up for me was to be involved politically in DC, working the right side of the aisle to encourage Republicans to get involved with finding a solution that can be bipartisan. I don't want to get into the details of that, but it's been almost a 7-year-long exercise. It's been an incredible place to practice, humbling, and lots of learning, and another place to practice the Three Tenets for sure. And so the original talk, when Geoff was looking for someone, he said, because we've had climate be the topic for talks in the past, he said, why don't you want to do the next one on climate? I said, I'm happy to. But 5 weeks ago, as this was unfolding, as in the pandemic was unfolding, it seemed to me a bit tone deaf to be talking about climate without also integrating in a conversation about the pandemic. So I came up with the title of The Nexus of Climate and COVID. And of course, the interesting thing about the word nexus is it's the intersection, but this is just one of the innumerable, uncountable intersections of all of life. It's just another node of Indra's net. And it's a reminder of true inner being and interdependence. And like all of life, this particular nexus of climate and COVID is an incredibly beautiful, perfect place to practice. And the practice of Zen Peacemakers is the Three Tenets. The Three Tenets of not knowing, bearing witness, and taking action. I'm imagining seeing many familiar faces, but some that I don't know. Maybe there's just a quick review of what those three tenets are. The not knowing doesn't mean that you don't know anything. It just means really, it's another way of saying beginner's mind, that you approach each moment not without the knowledge of how to balance a spreadsheet or how to hammer a nail or how to cook a delicious risotto. It's just that you need to not assume that what you know is the appropriate solution or an appropriate perspective to look at what is showing up for you as you and lead into the second tenet of bearing witness. As you bear witness to what's really happening right now with you and all around you, again, with a not knowing mind, without allowing, hopefully having your preconceived ideas and perspectives interfere with, really, as Bernie used to say, grokking what's really happening. And then from that process, what action is your heart called to take? How will you serve yourself? How do you serve humanity? How do you serve those around you, all beings? And I said it's a perfect time to practice the Three Tenets, because isn't this an incredible time, speaking of the pandemic, to talk about not knowing? I mean, we don't know anything, and the experts don't know anything. We don't know whether or not immunity will continue for those who survive. We don't know, if so, how long. We don't know really exactly how it transmits. We're finding now that it affects more parts of our body than the lungs, perhaps. We just don't know. And for me, the second one, bearing witness, I failed about three weeks ago to really bear witness to what was happening with me. I went into a real state for about 24, 36 hours of just raw fear and worry and anxiety. I was just so troubled by what wasn't happening in DC. Our leadership, I thought, was grossly insufficient and clueless. And I was so worried about the first responders. I was worried about the whole system just collapsing. I did worry a bit about what that would mean for me, sadly, as well. But it did cause me to lose that perspective of just appreciating what there is to appreciate at this moment, in this moment, with all that's happening right in front of me, and to try to stay with gratitude. So not knowing and bearing witness to what's happening to yourself, to your community, and to folks around. And then what action are you called to take to serve, to reduce suffering? What's your heart call you to do? So those are the things that I look forward to sharing. I'm going to speak a bit about some of the actual details of how these things come together from my work on climate, and having spent a lot of time, like I guess a lot of you, in terms of looking at what we do know about the virus, or what we think we know about the virus, and what the similarities are, what the differences are, and how they might help support each other going forward, and how they might actually interfere with supporting each other going forward. Just some things to talk about, and hopefully spur some thoughts for all of you to share with each other when I finish this sort of introductory opening. Before I get into similarities and differences and things, I just want to say that the most important message I think we can take away from this is to debunk the statement I've heard from so many people, not so much recently, but initially, was, wow, this is a great solution to climate risk, to global warming. Look at how much greenhouse gases have gone down in India. in Italy and in China. And isn't this cool? Well, no, it's not. This is not a solution to climate. And I think it's important that, I think we all pretty much know that, but I just want to say it explicitly, because it's important when folks tell you that, to push back on it. And after I go through the similarities and differences, I think it'll be easier to push back with details if you need to have the details. So in terms of similarities, both climate change and climate risk, global warming, and I'll use those interchangeably, so forgive me if I do, and pandemics, they both represent physical shocks to the system. And they're outside, exogenous shocks, so they're outside, and they will in climate change, and certainly we've seen it in pandemic, affect both supply and demand chains. They're both systemic. They propagate across the whole interconnected world, and we've seen that for sure. And that's what we will be seeing. We have seen growing amounts of it in global warming, but we haven't seen the catastrophic kind of stuff that I think most of us are aware we will be seeing in the future, at a time uncertain, but it's coming. Both are non-stationary, both are non-linear, both are risk multipliers in the sense that while in and of themselves they have their own damages, the those damages can cause other damages. I'll spend a little more time on that in a second. The thing that's important to note is they're both regressive in their impact on folks. So they're both really do an unfortunate differentiation on the class divide. So the folks that have financial capacity and sort of general well-being can do better in both situations. And I think it's it's a reminder that all of us on this call have the privilege to be on a call like this. That we have a place where we can have a quiet call. We have internet connection or cell phone connection. We have iPads. We have a way to do what we're doing. The bulk of humanity does not. And so I think we have this privilege. I think we want to be mindful of that. And finally, I think the similarities between both of them call to mind a favorite economic term of mine, which is the tragedy of the commons. And the tragedy of the commons in economic sense just describes the fact that in old England, villages had the commons, and you could graze your sheep or your cows on the commons for free. The problem with that is no one had personal property interest in the commons, and so they were happy to take and not give. And eventually the commons get destroyed. So that's what we see in both climate and with the pandemic. So in terms of the differences, I think the most important difference, certainly one of the most important differences between COVID and climate, is the time scale. It's been surreal for me, and I think probably for everybody, is how hyper fast this thing is hit and how it's accelerating in a way that doesn't allow anybody to ignore it. Well, it doesn't allow any sort of rational thinking person to ignore it. I mean, it's just there. And that's not the case with climate. It's actually the opposite in climate, because climate is gradual, it's cumulative, and it's unequally distributed in different degrees across the world and across communities. And the other challenge, and that causes two different responses. One, in terms of the pandemic, we've seen bipartisan in the US, bipartisan support for doing something to address this, shut the economy down, send out gobs of money. Hopefully that offsets the economic hardship for those who are dramatically hurt. It's right there. You can't ignore it, and we're doing something about it. Climate's the opposite. Climate has, instead of the tragedy of the commons in this case, climate suffers from something that new term I learned, it's called tragedy of the horizon, right? So that while we can talk about whether or not climate, well, I think all of us on the phone would agree that we know climate's going to be horrendous. When is what we don't know, and how bad is what we don't know. And without knowing when and how bad, it's hard to say that a $10 trillion response is sufficient, or whether it's 2 trillion, or I mean, to put it in economic terms and put it into terms that a government can deal with. It's very difficult. So nothing gets done, and we don't wake up tomorrow. Unlike with the pandemic, we don't wake up tomorrow with a consequence for having done nothing about climate today. So it's that time scale is one big difference. Global warming, of course, sadly, will be far longer lasting and far more disruptive than the pandemic. And I think that's something that's hard to imagine with what we're suffering with right now. But I think when we all sort of think it through, that's, I think, my opinion, is the case. It's going to be, as it evolves, and slowly and unevenly and across the world, it's going to be far worse, and it's going to last a lot longer, because the pandemic eventually will pass through. It'll kill who it kills, and it won't kill who it doesn't kill, and humanity will come out the other side. Global warming, we don't have that luxury of sort of there's no herd immunity with global warming as there is with the pandemic. In terms of the broader relationships, I think it's another thing that I've heard not said too often, but I think I want to debunk, which is climate change, global warming did not cause COVID. There's no relationship between the two of them. However, climate risk global warming is a risk multiplier, and will be setting up this with eliminating habitats for different species, cause migrations, which can turn, have pathogen risk going between things like we saw, like it may be the reason why we have the Wuhan virus, the Wuhan being the source of the virus now. Because that's a challenge. Of course, the other thing we've seen with the tornadoes is with climate change causing more weather challenges, having that on top of a pandemic at the same time is a real stress on our response and the recovery efforts. Though there is a possibility that the world that we're living in now, where we're doing a lot of telecommuting, and there's a lot less use of greenhouse gases, shorter supply chains, maybe more mindful purchasing and consumption. These are all things that might help. Both could benefit from this. We could have decreasing pollution, because the pollution is contributing to susceptibility to mortality with the pandemic, as I'm sure some of you have seen. So those are things that are, I think, warrant mentioning. One thing that I hope will come out of this is a shift in our mentality towards the need to manage long-term risk as opposed to just optimizing the short-term. Like, we need to have systems that can endure and have long-term resiliency. That has not been the planning in terms of corporate or government, certainly in local government, and it doesn't look like it's been in the national government right now either, but that sort of shift towards more of a mindful management of long-term resiliency would be helpful. And of course, we may come out of this with a greater respect for science, and it might make it a lot easier to have a conversation about the science of global warming after what we've seen the scientists have done in terms of helping guide us through this pandemic. Unfortunately, with the collapse in demand for fossil fuels, the prices have plummeted, and those lower prices will make it harder for people to feel incentive to move towards this self-sustainable energy. And as governments and communities, system and individuals recover from this and work towards trying to get back to some new normalcy, it'll be a conflict in terms of replacing fossil fuels if they're done with a way that's more expensive. I think that there's going to be a very challenging time for sustainable energy options, possibly with lower prices for fossil fuels. And just before I open it up for conversation, which I'm looking forward to, I just want to end with a prayer for all of those frontline folks who are serving all of our communities every day, the firefighters, the police, the grocery store folks, and most importantly, the medical folks that are standing there at risk with a higher mortality rate than any other of the folks that are standing on the front line. So we appreciate those. And just a reminder that the rest of the world, most of the rest of the world, doesn't have the privilege that we do to sit here and have this kind of conversation. So it's a lot to hold. But anyway, I look forward to conversations, opinions. Bernie always loved opinions. I do too. So time to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. I really appreciate your comments, and there's a lot to digest in what you said. So we can spend some time here having a conversation. I think our group size at 26 is just probably right at the edge of being as large as manageable for conversation. And we'll see. Protocol wise, if you'd like to speak, down, where is the hand raise thing? Down at the bottom of your screen, there's a functionality for for raising your hand if you'd like to talk. I'm not seeing it on mine right now. Or I will do my best to watch the screens, and if you simply want to just raise your hand like Grant's demonstrating
Yes.
right now. Thank you.
Yeah. So I would just say that for those of you that have an iPad, the opportunity to raise your hand is in the upper right-hand corner where you see participants. If you touch participants down at the very bottom, you can see raise your hand. And so you can do that. And then you also have the opportunity in the far right 3 little dot section where it says more, there's an opportunity to send out chats, comments to the group or privately to an individual or a small group.
Wonderful. Thanks for the help, Grant. Because I know these show up differently on a PC versus a pad or a phone. In as much as that this is not a council session, nonetheless, I want to encourage anyone with your comments. Feel free, if you'd like to have a more economic or political or sort of scholarly comment or conversation with Grant, that's absolutely welcome. But at the other end of the spectrum, if you feel more moved to share from your heart how all of this is affecting you, that's great as well. So I will be quiet and I'll watch for someone's hand or a virtual hand to go up. Or Liz, I see you. Thank you for, that's great. I'm unmuting you. Let's see if that works. Not yet. Liz, you may have to unmute yourself. Sometimes it doesn't. There you go.
Yeah. Well, Grant, I live south of Washington, D.C., and my husband works in Washington. So we generally are pretty attuned to the things that are going on in the government there. And I want to just say to you how grateful I am to know that you have been working in the Senate and with the leaders, trying to, and doing it in such a balanced way. I'm so grateful for that. Thank you. And everything that you said was so insightful. I really appreciated hearing all that.
One thing I just want to add, since you mentioned politics and you're in DC and probably have neighbors who serve on the Hill, both as staff and or as actual members. I entered the political world and the political science experience 7 years ago when I realized that was necessary to sort of be a climate warrior. And I entered with a negative opinion of politicians and the whole political process. And I've come away from it with a great appreciation for the challenges that all of those folks on the Hill, either side of the aisle, whatever they're, and their staffs and the members, everybody, bring to the table. I mean, it's a balance of desire for power, ego, and public service. And they all have, their own worldviews about what's best for the country, but they're there to represent what's best for the country and for their constituents. So as I said, I have a great appreciation for all of them. And having the Three Tenets as my practice before I went into each of those meetings was always helpful. When I forgot it, the Three Tenets, which does happen.
We got Trump.
Yeah, I'd get reminded pretty quickly that that's not the way to go. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll say that one of the reasons it's so heartening for me is because as I listen and watch, either in conversation personally with people, like you say, who work in the district, or when I read news accounts or hear people on, reporting and stuff, it doesn't seem like to me that the majority have any tenets that they carry with them into their job, that part of their personal duty for having tenets or a code of conduct that seems so often these days to be overridden by other priorities. And I'm just glad to know you're there. And I hope you have friends that you pull in at the same time. Thank you again.
Thanks, Liz. Jacqueline's raised her hand, but I want to just make a quick comment here, Jacqueline, before you go. And by the way, you're unmuted. So I want to make sure that we have dear guests from the UK, Italy, Germany, and elsewhere in Europe. So I really want to encourage our friends from Europe to comment, so that this doesn't become so much America's centric, if we would. So anyway, Jacqueline, please.
I just say real quick, Geoff, very good point, because both of these issues are completely, absolutely global. And so many of us in the States, I think like most countries, are sort of stuck in our own perspective. Like it's all about us, but it's not. It's all about the greater us.
I would welcome any suggestions about things we can do from our shelter in place vantage point to serve at this point. So I just wanted to open up that discussion of what we can do now under these conditions.
Thank
think that, yeah, that's a great question. I think this is a great time for folks to share what they've been called to do.
Well, I guess I could start with,
I'll come next.
I've opened up a meditation, free meditation, morning and evening sits on all weekdays for people to kind of get a more calm perspective. And I'm starting to sew face masks that I'm going to be distributing. But I feel like there's more I can do, and I would like to do something specifically for people who have lost their jobs and aren't, you know, are really dealing with survival. And I kind of feel at a loss for what to do for the people who are not, like you say, Grant, like us, who are fortunate to, you know, be safe and sheltered, and I'm aware of that privilege, and kind of not sure how to go about helping out there.
Well, I want to hear what others have to say about that, but what I can share with you in Boulder, I'm a member of the Boulder Rotary, and through the Boulder Rotary, I've become aware of different efforts specifically to feed two different groups. One is to provide warm, healthy meals with love for the frontline folks at the medical centers. And then for those people who don't have, you know, who are really, you know, food challenged, or, you know, hunger is right in front of them. So I think individual communities are doing things like that, and raising funds to do it. It's a way to keep local restaurants working. But I think if you look in your local community, you'll probably be able to find something like that if you have the financial capacity to support it. Yeah, but I'd love to hear what others are seeing.
Thank you, Jacqueline and Grant. Eddie, you had your hand up earlier, and you're unmuted. And then after Eddie, Steve, thank you for putting up your virtual hand. So you'll go after Eddie. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, I'm the spiritual director of our Sangha here in Lancaster, PA, the heart of the Pennsylvania Dutch country. And one of the things, well, to address a question that Jacqueline raised, is if you can join with a group, whether it's a chamber of commerce or if you belong to a Sangha, to see what resources you can marshal to do something. And what we did, and I wish I could say we did it consciously, but we were implementing the Three Tenets, is we contacted the countywide Lancaster Homeless Coalition. And we talked to them about, what do you need? How can we help? And we raised funds internally, and what we wound up doing was buying in bulk knapsacks and filling them with items that the coalition told us, this is what people who are living on the street could really use. So it was some basic items like underwear and socks, and we had a whole list of them. And we met virtually, as our Sangha, as I think many Sanghas are doing, and got together and divvied up the different tasks and began buying through either Costco or Amazon or whatever in bulk items. Then having other people on the Sangha meeting at a place to assemble these backpacks, and then having someone else drive them off to the coalition where they would be distributed to the homeless who were living in a particular park in our town. So the implementation was really, first of all, we knew we wanted to do something, but we didn't know what. And we talked about it and came up with this idea, but we had to have other people bear witness for us. In other words, we went to some of the experts who work with the homeless on a daily basis. And then we formed a plan within our Sangha, and then we implemented it. Then we took action. And it has worked surprisingly well, given that we really, most of us don't meet physically, but it can be done with the power of a group.
Thank you, Eddie. I appreciate that sharing. And Steve, we'll go to you in just one second. But and Stefano, I don't want to put you on the spot. But if you're willing, after Steve speaks, my new friend Stefano is located in Italy, and as we all know, Italy has been so hard hit by this virus. And if after Steve, Stefano, if you're comfortable making some comments, that would be wonderful. And if not, it's okay. Steve, go ahead.
Okay, I'm based in the UK. I work in a hospital, and I'm also involved in Extinction Rebellion. In our hospital, we've seen quite a few deaths, and we've had one today of a member of staff. We're doing a lot of work in the hospital with mindfulness practice for all staff. They all have the opportunity to take part either through the chaplaincy service or using things like this, Zoom. We hold sessions throughout the day for staff on various shifts to be able to log in and do some mindfulness practice. They also have access to an improved counselling service. In our community, we've been really impressed with how well the local community has come together to do everything from calling on the vulnerable by phone to check if people want anything, food delivering, medication picking up, that sort of thing. And that's one of the things that worries me in terms of what Grant said about the changes being much slower with climate. Once this COVID-19 has been dealt with, and I tested positive myself, I've been off work for 3 weeks having tested positive, so I know what it's like. I don't know how we maintain the community support that has happened because of the pandemic, when people will see things happening very slowly, as you say, Grant, and whether the community cohesion that we're seeing now will dissipate. And certainly our local Extinction Rebellion group is very involved in supporting things like food banks and stuff like that. But again, once the virus is over, people will think we're just a protest group again, because there isn't something immediately to get to grips with. And I'm wondering what people's thoughts are about how we maintain that sort of impetus for community cohesion, resilience, everything else. That's me.
Thank you, Steve. I think that's really a timely comment. And just my observation, you know, by nature, we have short-term memories. And certainly with unpleasant occurrences, we would just as soon forget them. So I think there's a real risk there of that, you know, that we move past this and tell ourselves a story that everything's okay. And I think that's a really important point. Stefano, would you like, let me see if I can unmute you here, and if not, you may need to.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for admitting me in this meeting. Well, as you probably know, Italy was one of the first countries in Europe who was interested by this infection, the coronavirus, and we are still under quarantine. And personally, I live in Milano. Milano is probably the major hotspot in Italy, and we really leave the problem of the infection in our everyday life. So in Italy, the situation it's quite strange, because it's, as probably in every country of Europe now, we are everything is still, and it's quite impossible to follow our normally daily life. But anyway, I see that many Buddhist groups in Italy are trying to move their activities from the real world to the web, or organizing some meditations or meetings like this one, for example, talking about what it's possible to do after the crisis, because the problem is not completely now, but we have to face what is going to happen after, in the next month in our country. I'm also part of the Italian Buddhist Union, that is an umbrella organization that gathers a lot of practice centers of practice in Italy. And what we did in the last days is to give financial support to the many non-profit organizations that are working with very fragile people in Italy, in order to give them medical care, food, and other kind of care, for example, for the old people. So we are really experimenting in this moment what is engaged Buddhism, and to really bring the practice where it's needed. And so the problem that we are facing in this moment is how to act and how to be active in the next futures, in the next months. Because after the medical problem, I mean, we have to face, for example, the psychological side of this situation. Because one, for example, people who stay at home for many months, how will they face going out again and having relations again with other people? Not only not on the workplaces, but also in supermarkets, for example, or in the cinemas, in the theaters, or even in their home. So the problem that we are living now is a relation problem, a psychological problem. And the work we are trying to do as Buddhists in Italy is trying to give the people instruments and inspirational tools to face this kind of situation for the next future. And now I will end, someone is also beginning to think about the relation of the climate change problem to the coronavirus, and how to put the two things together. Because, for example, I live in a part of Italy that is very polluted, And it's very strange that it's in this period when everything is still, you go out in the streets when it's possible and you breathe the air, and it's completely different from the normal air you breathed during the last months. And this is something that we have to think about very, very seriously, because which kind of world have we built till now, and which world we will find out in the next month. So it's a topic on the table. That's all I have to say for the moment.
That's a beautiful thing. I thank you so much. And I think you make a very good point about the pollution, which I didn't really stress as much as I meant to. And I think I'm glad you brought it up, because that could be the greatest hope for the climate, is that around the world, people have now tasted and seen what a cleaner earth is like. And that only happens with less fossil fuels. So hopefully it'll be a wake up, a painful, but a silver lining wake up call, hopefully. Well, yeah, thank you.
I appreciate that both, and coincidentally, Steve and Stefano both made comments that are similar about, what do we do once we find a vaccine and we can put this particular phase behind us. And I mentioned earlier, we have kind of a human tendency to want to forget the bad times and get back to the, being happy again. But in addition to that, there are greater forces, and I won't go into detail, and I think everyone knows what I'm talking about. There are greater forces at work here who have a vested interest in things seeming normal so that consumption can resume. And so we will have, in the next 3 months, 1 year, 18 months, 2 years, whatever it is, a real challenge at keeping a focus on climate change and environmental crisis at this point. So perhaps if there are other comments on that topic, maybe we can just narrow for a minute. If that's, Rona, you have your hand up. Let's see, where are you? If you can unmute yourself.
Yeah.
This is like one of those board games where I have to find everybody.
Oh, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm Rona Walensky. I'm in Boulder, Colorado, and an economist by early training. And one of the things that's, I think, apparent is that the collapse of the US and world economy is not something that's going to go away with the ending of the virus. We will be dealing with hardship at many, many levels. So the need for both community level action to support those who are most hard hit, and the need for transforming political action to create systems that meet the needs that have been exposed will not disappear, I think, overnight. I mean, one of the things I'm conscious of is that we had a very imperfect Band-Aid over the inequality in the states, and the racial inequality especially. That Band-Aid has been ripped off as we've seen the dramatic differences in access to healthcare and morbidity rates and disconnection from schooling. So I think even now there's a moment in the US, I don't know about European politics, for people to be speaking up and directing comments towards their elected officials about the nature of the relief that's going to be provided, and to be continuing that advocacy when we have a medical solution to this virus. But the reality is that this virus is going to become endemic, and mutations on this virus are going to become part of our world, just as the flu has become part of our world, only at a much scarier level. So I don't think we're going back to something. We're only going forward. Thank you.
Rona, thank you. And I just want to add to your comment about being politically engaged. I want to remind, and I think this is true of all countries, not just the US, but we citizens are the folks that run the country. We delegate that responsibility to the members of Congress in the US, but they are supposed to be working for us. They forget that frequently. what I can tell you in my almost 7 years of lobbying on the Congress is it really matters when a constituent communicates, and it's important that you communicate in a respectful way. If you communicate with them and call them, imply they're stupid or whatever, not effective. But if you communicate with them in a respectful way, find a way to congratulate or thank them for something that you appreciate they've done. And no one's 100% perfect. No one's 100% wrong. I mean, no one's that smart to be 100% wrong. So there's got to be something you can thank them for. Thank you for this. And by the way, I'm very concerned about climate, and I'm very concerned about the pandemic. I hope you would consider these kinds of things. That's what I would like you as my representative to do. It makes a big difference. So I would encourage you to do that. Email is the best way to do it. Don't send a snail mail letter, because the possibility of anthrax still causes snail mail letters to be delayed by 2 or 3 weeks. And staff is typically millennial, young, and they're very good on email. They're not so good on real mail, but really get engaged. They don't hear from very many people at all. And a lot of the people they hear from just yell at them. So they're not really listening to those people either. If you approach your senator, your representative, your member of parliament, wherever you are, respectfully and tell them what you're concerned about, it makes a difference. They count that up, and they see where their constituents are. So thank you.
Wise words, Grant. Thank you very much. Love to hear from someone else. And any of our European friends who are part of the call, if you have a perspective from where you're sitting, we'd love to hear. Kathleen, thank you. Let's see.
Yeah.
Oops, I might have just undid it. I just undid it, Kathleen. There we go. Now you're on.
There we are. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Yeah. And thanks, Grant, for your inspiring thoughts. So I do indeed feel privileged to be here with you and to have this opportunity to share. Even though, for example, my personal income as a freelancing writer and writing coach has dropped by 90%. So privilege is also relative. Still, I know that, and maybe also among us here on the screen. So we're dealing with that, for example, because it's not only my situation, but as some of you know, I'm living in a co-housing community of 60 people here in Bonn in Germany. And we immediately started a solidarity fund, so to say, an open box where people who are able to put some money in, they simply put it in. It has a place in our workshop, and who needs money goes there and gets and takes it. So we experiment with that, and we know that this is difficult in bigger surrounding, but among us we wanted to try that, and it's not easy, but this is possible. And we are actually discussing that fund for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, and now suddenly it's possible to do it. And it changes a lot in trust and in solidarity experience for those who give and for those who take. So this is exciting, and so we're trying on this small base to cope with the virus, with the virus situation at the moment. And the privilege issue also brings me again to the point of what is actually normal and what does it mean to go back to normal. So I have a lot of resistance to that, as I sense and know, we know that normal is for many people very bad. And so I have no longing for normality on that scale. And what also makes me feel privileged, of course, is the political and medical situation here in Germany. I just read in a paper that there was some international study, and that Germany, of course, is one of the countries that has, at least one of the best medical system, obviously, in the world. I wasn't sure about that, but I read it now, and at the same time, tries politically to be, to include the people, to give orientation, to show some kind of authentic communication also, which is also new to me. I was how do you say that, an anti-government person pretty long, especially in the climate change topic. I still am. But now it's somehow they and maybe even I managed to tune in a way to get through this crisis. This is exciting, so that differences also on the political level they don't disappear, but there's more of the connection point. And it's not only because of this big enemy outside there, this virus or something. It's something different. I'm still trying to understand that, how that worked. And so the last point, the privilege also leads me to the point that I think what you said, Grant, about the shift in conscience. I think this is something that we privileged people can also go for, and use our pretty safe situation for. And so what I feel at the moment is also this practice of counsel that the peacemakers celebrate or practice is very helpful as a space of not knowing, and when I offer it here for people, it's helpful a helpful space to slow down and to get beyond the panic, and also beyond the activism. I want to do something, I need to help. So to slow down, to relax, and to breathe, and from there a shift can happen. That's my feeling and my experience. So I appreciate that practice very much at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. I really appreciate those comments. And I had a couple of announcements I wanted to do at the end, but I'm just going to insert one here now, Kathleen, since you brought this up. And perhaps everyone knows, but we've doubled the frequency of our council sessions. We have done a Zen Peacemakers council meeting over Zoom once a month up until now. Now we're doing this every other week, just because we feel, and Kathleen, I think you've been in some recently, and others on this call too. We feel everyone's heart and the need for connection, and for that space of not knowing and being together, not knowing. So anyway, not to take up too much time, but we will have another, take a look at the website. We'll have another council session next week, and I've been reaching out to some of the most skilled council leaders in our community to lead those sessions. Iris Katz from Israel will lead next week, so join us if you can. We are approaching the top of the hour, and but we can continue here for a while. If people have comments, you can raise your actual hand or your virtual hand. Roland, thank you. And I just met Roland earlier. I just unmuted you. Let's see. There you go. Roland, you're unmuted.
Thank you. Yes. I'm in the UK. To give you some idea, I'm kind of in the area that bulges out into the North Sea, in a place called Norwich. And just to touch on the point about making contact with local organizations and not-for-profits or charities in your area, one of the things that I'm aware of is that charities in the UK are undergoing, you know, levels of stress, not just because of the demand put on their services, but because overnight, some of them have lost 90% of their income and their ability to actually function. And it's quite apparent that one of the consequences of this situation is that we are going to lose some of the existing charities, that they simply financially won't be viable anymore. So first of all, there's a practical side to that, is how do those services that they were providing then get provided? But also about, which I guess touches on the not knowing, about trying to say to people on an organizational level, we don't know whether you're still going to be here in 3 months' time, whether you still will have an organization, let alone have a job. And I think that's just adding to the kind of stress that people are going through. It also means on a much longer term basis that charities are going to have to look at the amount of money they keep in their reserves to be able to carry on functioning. And the general guidance in the UK is that a charity should have at least 1 year's worth of money. Now, I'm involved with quite a small charity, children's charity, and we usually have about £10,000 in the bank. If we were to cover the annual running costs of the service, we would need something like £250,000 in the bank. So that's the order of challenge that we could really be looking at. At the moment, I think people are doing it week by week and trying to get through the first 3 months. And if they survive the first 3 months, then maybe they'll look at the next 3 months and so on. But if we want to try and confront some of these ideas about building resilience, about what is good for our long-term survival, I guess, and the way we want to live our lives, then we are going to have to, as communities, give ourselves a really good, hard steer. And I guess that's where perhaps witness comes in, and from there comes the action. And I'm, so impressed with what Grant about trying to work with people who you wouldn't necessarily automatically think of as being allies, but who can bring something to you. And that in itself is an enormous challenge for a lot of people. Does it mean, for example, that we might have to end up talking to people who deny the existence of climate change? And there are some people who would say, never do that. And there are others who might say, let's just go for a practical solution. I don't know. So that's kind of my comments.
Thank you, Roland. Grant, anything you want to respond to? Oh, I see Amy's got her hand up. Hang on. Let's see if that worked, Amy. And if not, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Good to see you from Denver. Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just had a good thought, or just, I've been struggling. The thing that gives me, I think, the most anxiety is this idea of what happens after, and what going back to normal looks like. And, it's like almost going to session or going to something where you're in this very intense, unusual situation. And sort of then it dissipates after, after a couple of weeks. and you forget, and that's natural, that's what we're going to do, but how to build that resilience, and how to combine that with the idea of recovering from this. And I think about 9/11 and the idea of, okay, everybody just go shopping and keep our economy strong, and the ways, because it's an economic collapse, how we are going to recover economically is easily going to look like just more of the same. So number one, how can we stay vigilant about that? And how can we also stay vigilant politically so that our democracy is able to survive? Something just happened. Are you still hearing me?
You're finding me.
Okay, so I just heard. So there's the idea of vigilance. Then there's the idea of bearing witness, which is just what just gave me a spark of hope in terms of what I could do. One of the things is I'm working with youth who are living in poverty and who also are largely undocumented. And what I am seeing on a personal level with these families is something I would not have known about. I would not have known about the man who's undocumented, who has the virus and is very sick, but is afraid to stop working at his job, which is installing flooring. He can't afford to not go because and he doesn't have any rights, etc. So I'm thinking that one of the things I might do is simply bear witness and sort of document these things from the position I have, being able to see them, and that maybe in that way, sort of keeping those experiences and those worlds in the front of our minds. Just a thought. But.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate that. I think we all share that concern. Dorothy, you've got your hand up. Thank you.
Yes, I do. Sorry, I don't know how to get my picture up there, but this is sort of on the more lighthearted side. I couldn't help noticing that, Grant, you had a yellow bird sitting on your shoulder when you were talking. And it was a really lovely, beautiful, and its beak was very close to your ear. So it looked to me like it could be listening, or it could be trying to tell you something very important. In which case, I hope it didn't go in one ear and out the other, because on the other side, there was a dark bird with a dark beak. The flow of energy would have gone that way. So, yeah, my message being practicing a Buddhist with various Tibetan Buddhism with exercises, practices like Tonglen is, in the midst of this suffering, to also practice sending and receiving joy and happiness. It's not an easy practice, but yeah, that was, and I am an artist, and I am taking this time to try to, follow my heart. I'm going around the backyard here because they're these empty snail shells, and they're beautiful. They're all bleached white, and I'm picking them up, and I'm putting them as part of a sculpture because the Buddha had the snails come up on top of his head to show compassion when he was sitting out in the hot sun, meditating out in the sun. So I do know we all do what our hearts lead us to do. And thank you. I'm glad of being part of this conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Dorothy. Grant, you're going to have to respond about the bird, of course.
Well, in fact, I'm very close to that bird, and I really am the bird. but I don't abide the dark side. Of course you have to. I mean, it's the dark side and the light side. That's all part of it, right? Anyway, thank you. Good catch.
Lisa Marie, can you unmute yourself? Or
Yep.
There you go. There you go.
Good morning, everyone, Dharma family. I just wanted to share a little bit of what I'm doing. I'm on faculty at Center for Musical Arts as their flute teacher, Native American flute and piccolo, and I run a course called Flute and Drum Circle with an emphasis on ceremony. And the teachers there are doing amazing things, trying to teach their students online. We're connected with the Colorado Music Festival, and it looks like it's going to be canceled. So the music school is in dire need of raising funds. So my partner, Sensei Jason, and I created a live performance on a YouTube with asking people for donations, even if it's $1, to donate to the school, hopefully so that it can survive after this. I've been a musician my whole life, 38 years now, cultivating. And I have worked for music schools that have fallen apart because the arts are not supported in Western society the way everything else is supported. And I just felt like I wanted to do something from my bed. I have a spine injury, and I can only stand for about a half an hour at a time, and I can only sit for about a half an hour at a time. So we did this concert last week. It's available. I think it's still up on the ZPI Hive. And if anybody even has $1, I donated $20, and I haven't made an income since I moved to Colorado. I haven't been able to find work here. So, you know, we've got the virus going on. Musicians are uniquely equipped, I think, to deal with stuff like this. We practice for hours, solitary hours, in a room of 4 walls, and then we know what it's like not to have income. I think all artists do. We also know how to listen very carefully to ourselves and to others and to the earth. And I think a lot of these things are necessary right now. I really appreciated what Kathleen said about really stopping and listening, and the answers will come. I think that whole not knowing tenet is really, really important right now. We may not have solutions right now, and if we let our minds run and race instead of actually really listen to our own hearts, listen to what's coming up in every moment, and also share in communities like this. We do have access to this. This is a privilege. Just really do what we can. I agree with that, reaching out and connecting with each other. I'm also doing the Yoo-Hoo class with David, which is kind of fun. And the order of disorder is really profound, subtle dharma, very profound. And this last week, Yoo-Hoo had us do some miming and go to a door where we couldn't get through. And he had us feel what we were feeling. What did it feel like not to be able to get through that door? Frustrated, confused, whatever. And then he said, go into a place inside of yourself and find the lightness in this. How can you physically create lightness through that emotion? It was very, very profound. Very profound dharma.
Thank you, Lumi. And Georgia asked, and I think this is appropriate to do, if we want to donate, can you give us a web address or something?
Yeah, I have on my events page at lisamariemcgrath.com, which is my website. On the events page, I have all of the information there, and it's also on the ZPI Hive.
Yes, that's right.
My group is called Mystic Pulse. So the YouTube is up. And if you pull up the YouTube to listen to the YouTube, the donation link is also on the YouTube. So it's on the Hive, it's on the YouTube, and it's on my website, the lisamariemcgrath.com.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting close to running out of time. We need to finish well enough before the bottom of the hour, because I think a few of us have calls at the bottom of the hour, and a number of people have had to step off. Are there any last comments anyone would like to make? And then I'll close with just a few phrases. Kathleen, thank you. Can you unmute yourself? There you go.
Yeah. Just one short remark, because I'm also inspired by the artistic comments of the last folks who did comment. So what I came about when I sensed more deeply about what I can do or what's coming up, there was a combination that came to my mind between the useful that once you're tested positive on the virus, it is important to know whom you were in touch with. So I thought this is a wonderful idea to get more conscious about who am I in touch with. So I started a couple of days ago. I simply started to write down the names of the people I meet every day, those I know or those I meet in shops, or just to and to make them into either a picture or just a list. And so have different ways of writing the names, bigger, those who came closer than 1.5 meters or below the security distance, and those who were far away or only virtual contacts. And so in this way, on the one hand, I do this documentary and I can tell. If I would be tested, I could say, these are the people I met during the last 2 weeks. And on the other hand, I have a picture of everyday relationship, my personal, Kathleen's net, Indra's net on my personal level. And I can be grateful every evening about those people I meet. So this was just a small idea of how to feel better myself and how to get through this.
Thank you. I love that.
That's what I want to share.
I love that. That's great. And Jacqueline, you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to say that this is my first time attending a Zen Peacemakers meeting, and I'm so impressed, and I feel so fed and inspired, and I've been on the edge of wanting to join you for a few years, and so I'm very happy to meet you all and hear about the wonderful things you're doing in your communities and connect with you. It's great. I just want to thank you.
Welcome. It's so nice to have you be part of our group, and please join for more events. Announcement wise, I wanted also to mention we're doing meditation together every day, every weekday, virtually. And this is 11 a.m. Eastern US time. So you can calibrate off of New York at 11 a.m. And we meditate together for half an hour, and we've had anywhere from 12 to almost 30 people each morning. And some of the folks here on the call are regular. So Grant, do you want to make a final comment, or can I wrap up with just a short prayer?
I think a short prayer is great. I would just say I really appreciate the comments everyone's had, and just remind, we're all in this together, whatever our level of privilege or not. But we as in the greater community will get through this, and I'm hopeful that on the other side we'll come through in a way that will make us more mindful and more active in addressing the very real existential risk that global warming represents. So thank you all for being here, and I'm happy if folks have specific questions or follow-ups later. I'm happy to talk with others one-on-one. So, but thank you, Geoff. Great job in managing us.
And how can we get in touch with you, Grant?
I'm very simple. It's grant@grantcouch.com.
Okay. Couldn't be easier. Thank you so much. And thanks for being our guest. Really appreciate it. May all beings be happy. May all beings be safe. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be at ease. And for the sake of all beings, may we all be realized together. Thank you all. Be safe. Take care of yourselves. Take care of someone else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.